What is it that drives a man or a woman to kill another? Perhaps it's an instinctive rage, or perhaps it's something more calculating, like murdering for profit or some personal gain. It's a scary thought that many of us do indeed have the mental capacity to harm someone else, or even kill them. But what about those who do it over and over and over again? Actually, what about those who make a game out of it and go on to kill needlessly, if only to fill a dark void in themselves? Today, we take a look at a serial killer who was so brazen with his murders that he would openly mock the police. They called him the Zodiac Killer, and he operated in North California from the late 1960s and into the early 1970s. His victims include 4 men and 3 women, between the ages of 16 and 29, which is quite a broad range, indicating that he didn't discriminate or have a particular type of person he liked to hunt, as is common amongst some serial killers. However, it can be argued that he went after couples on dates, at least for his first few victims. He would send cryptograms to the police during his active years, taunting them with hidden messages. Of the 4 cryptograms sent to the police, only 1 has ever been solved. Needless to say, the Zodiac Killer was never found. In this video, we'll begin by taking a look at each of his different attacks in greater detail, and while I won't be using any graphic images, the subject of what we're about to discuss might not be for the faint of heart. Therefore, consider this a disclaimer as we dive into the world of the Zodiac. The Lake Herman Road Attack. His first murder was said to take place in Berryessa, California, on Lake Herman Road, on December 20th, 1968. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were 2 high school students on a first date and were planning to attend a Christmas concert at Hogan High School, not too far away from Jensen's home. They would visit a friend first before going out for a meal at a local restaurant, before driving out to Lake Herman Road at around 10:15 PM. Faraday parked up in a recluse area, a sort of lover's lane type location, where youngsters would go to fool around, as we've seen in those typical American movies. Shortly after 11 PM though, their bodies were found by a woman who lived nearby. Robert Graysmith, an author who became very involved in the case of the Zodiac Killer, theorized after studying the forensic data that another car pulled up alongside the couple. The killer apparently exited the vehicle and may have ordered Faraday and Jensen out of their car as well. Jensen appears to have left the car first, but when Faraday was halfway out, the killer apparently shot him in the head. Jensen tried to flee, but she was also gunned down about 28 feet from the car. She was shot 5 times in the back before the killer drove off. The Blue Rock Springs Park Attack. The next attack would take place on July 4th, 1969, in the Blue Rock Springs Park, in Vallejo, just 4 miles from Lake Herman Road. Darlene Ferrin and Michael McGill drove into Blue Rock Springs Park and parked only to be joined by the killer, who parked alongside them. For some reason though, the killer drove off, and would return 10 minutes later. The killer then approached the passenger side of the car, which was Ferrin's side, and flashed a torch in her face, as well as a 9mm pistol. He then shot at them 5 times. Forensics believe that the killer walked away from the car after that, but when hearing McGill still breathing or moaning in pain, he returned and shot both him and Ferrin twice more before driving off. It's here that the Zodiac Killer would first make himself known. He called the police department to claim responsibility for the attack, as well as the previous attack on Jensen and Faraday, which had taken place just 6 months earlier. Tracing the phone call, the police were able to find that the killer had phoned them from a phone box just a few blocks away from their own station. Ferrin was pronounced dead, but interestingly, McGill survived the attack despite being shot in the face. McGill was able to describe the attacker as a 26 to 30-year-old white male with light brown curly hair. A few weeks later, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner received 3 letters supposedly created by the killer where he took credit for the shootings. Each letter also indicated 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram, which the killer said would reveal his identity once cracked. He would demand that the cryptogram be printed on the front page of each of the company's newspapers, otherwise he would spend the entire weekend killing people at night. As I mentioned earlier, one of the cryptograms was solved, and the message contained read, "I like killing people because it's so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and those I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name, because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." The final word of the message doesn't appear to be a word at all, but a mix of 18 letters that may or may not have some meaning. The newspapers would end up publishing the cryptograms eventually, though not on the front page. Either way, the threats of the killer in his letters did not come to fruition. In August 1969, a few days after the last letter, the San Francisco Examiner received another letter from the killer with the salutation, "This is the Zodiac speaking." This would actually be the first time the killer referred to himself as the Zodiac, and thus it became the name in which the police and the media would use to identify him as. In the letter, the Zodiac revealed more details about the shootings, some of which had not been released to the public and could only have been known by the police or the killer himself. He also noted that once the police cracked his codes, they would have him. The Lake Berryessa Attack. A month later, on September 27, 1969, two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were going for a picnic at Lake Berryessa. A man approached them wearing a black executioner's type hood with a bib that had a white cross circle symbol on it. He had a gun, which Hartnell recalled was a .45. The hooded man claimed to be an escaped convict from jail, where he had killed a guard and stolen a car, and that he now needed their car and money so that he could head to Mexico and escape the law. He had pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline and told Shepard to tie up Hartnell before he tied her up. Hartnell believed that this was a robbery, but then the killer pulled out a knife and began stabbing them both repeatedly. Hartnell suffered 6 stab wounds, while Shepard suffered 10. The killer then drew the same cross-circle symbol on Hartnell's car door and wrote beneath it the dates of the previous murders. At 7:40 the same day, the Zodiac Killer called the sheriff's office by payphone to lay claim to the most recent crime. The phone call was traced, and the phone was found still off the hook, just minutes later at a car wash nearby the sheriff's office. A palm print was lifted from the phone, but it was not matched to any suspect. After hearing their screams for help, a man and his son who were fishing nearby found the victims and were able to summon the police. Cecilia Shepard was conscious when they arrived and was able to provide a detailed description of the attacker. However, during their transport to hospital, she entered a coma and never regained consciousness. Hartnell survived the encounter. The Presidio Heights Attack. On October 11, 1969, a passenger entered a cab driven by driver Paul Stein at the intersections of Mason and Geary Streets in San Francisco and asked to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. For reasons unknown, driver Paul Stein drove the passenger past Maple Street and into Cherry Street. The passenger then shot Stein once in the head with a 9mm pistol. He then took Stein's wallet and car keys and tore off the blood-stained tail of his shirt. 3 teenagers saw the crime take place and called the police, where they also saw the man wiping the cab down for prints before walking away. 2 blocks from the crime scene, Officer Don Fuchs responded to the call and observed a white man walking along the sidewalk and stepping into one of the yards of the houses on the north side of the street. Whether this was the killer or not is up for debate, as Fuchs estimated the man was in his late 30s to 40s, while the teenagers who observed the killer estimated he was between 25 to 30 years of age. The radio dispatcher at the time alerted all units to be on the look for a black suspect, so Fuchs ignored the white man he had seen without stopping him for questions. This mix-up in descriptions has never been explained. The Zodiac would send the Chronicle another letter, only this time it contained the bloody shirt tail of Paul Stein. It also contained a threat that the Zodiac would next target schoolchildren on a bus. He wrote, "I'll shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." At 2 PM on October 20th, 1969, someone called the Oakland Police Department claiming to be the Zodiac and demanded that one of the most prominent lawyers at the time, either F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belly, appear on a local television show so that he might converse with them. Someone did in fact call in claiming to be the Zodiac Killer, saying that his name was Sam, and Belly agreed to meet with him in Daly City, but he never showed up. Another cryptogram was received a month later in November and consisted of 340 characters. The day after this, the Zodiac Killer mailed a 7-page letter stating that 2 policemen had actually stopped him and spoken to him just minutes after he had killed Paul Stine. He would also go on to mail the lawyer Melvin Belly another swatch of Stine's shirt, where he claimed he wanted Belly to help him. The Modesto Joyride. On the night of March 22, 1970, a woman named Kathleen Johns was driving to meet her mother. Kathleen was 7 months pregnant and was also accompanied by her 10-month-old daughter beside her. A car began honking its horn and flashing its headlights behind her while she was on Highway 132. She pulled off the road and stopped when a man in a car parked behind her and approached her car. He stated that he had noticed her right wheel was wobbling and offered to tighten it for her. For some reason, she agreed, and after finishing his work, the man drove off. However, after going to re-enter the highway, the wheel immediately came off. The man returned and offered to drive her to the nearest gas station for help. Again, for whatever reason, Kathleen agreed, and she and her daughter climbed into his car. During the ride, the car would pass by several service stations, but the man did not stop at any of them. He drove for about 90 minutes through the back roads near the city of Tracy. When Johns asked him why he hadn't stopped at any of the previous service stations, he changed the subject. When he finally stopped at an intersection, Johns jumped out with her daughter and hid in a nearby field. The driver searched for her using his flashlight and hollered out that he would not hurt her before he eventually gave up. Unable to find her, he got back in his car and drove off. Johns made her way to the police station in Patterson. When Johns gave her statement to the sergeant, she noticed the sketch of Paul Stine's killer and claimed that this was the same man who had abducted her. Fearing he might come back and kill her, the sergeant had Johns detained. When her car was found, it had been torched. The Zodiac Killer would continue to taunt the police for the remainder of the 1970s, sending them letters and greeting cards, which he'd also forward onto the press. He would also send letters to deny his involvement in the 1970 bombing of a police station in San Francisco. However, he did state that there was more glory to killing a cop than a kid, because a cop can shoot back. The letter also included a diagram of a bomb, which the Zodiac claimed he would use to blow up a school bus. On April 28, 1970, he sent a greeting card to the Chronicle, where he wrote, "I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast," followed by what had now become his signature, the cross within a circle. He stated that he would use a bomb to blow up a school bus soon, unless the newspaper published the full details of what he had written. He also wanted to start seeing people wearing some nice Zodiac buttons. 2 months later, on June 26, 1970, Zodiac wrote again, saying that he was upset that no one was wearing Zodiac buttons. He also wrote, "I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. The Zodiac was possibly referring to the murder of Sergeant Richard Radtich a week earlier on June 19th, where Radtich was writing a parking ticket in his squad car. An assailant shot him in the head, but the San Francisco Police Department doubt that the Zodiac himself was involved in this murder. It still, however, remains unsolved. He would write another letter of the Phillips 66 roadmap of the San Francisco Bay Area, where he drew diagrams and wrote instructions, along with a 32-letter cipher that, if cracked, would lead to where he had placed a bomb. The cipher was never cracked, and the alleged bomb was never found either. In a letter to the Chronicle on July 24, 1970, Zodiac took credit for Kathleen Johns' abduction. He also wrote another letter 2 days later, where he made his own lyrics about making a list of ways he planned to torture his slaves in paradise. On October 27, 1970, Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, who had been covering the case, received a Halloween card signed with the letter Z and the Zodiac's cross circle symbol. The message inside the card read, "Peekaboo, you are doomed." The Riverside Attack. On October 30th in 1966, 2 years before the Zodiac's first killing at Lake Herman Road, 18-year-old Cherry Jo Bates, a student at Riverside Community College, spent the evening at the library until it closed at 9 p.m. Neighbours reported hearing screams at around 10:30 p.m, and Bates was found dead the next morning. Her body was found between two abandoned buildings, which were to be demolished for campus renovations. It was revealed that her car had been tampered with, and she had been brutally beaten and stabbed here. A man's watch with a torn wristband was found nearby. A month later in November, typewritten letters were mailed to the Riverside police, titled The Confession. The author claimed to take responsibility for Bates' murder and was able to provide information about the crime that had not been released to the public. The author warned that Bates was not the first victim and would not be the last. In December that same year, a poem was discovered carved into the bottom side of a desk in Riverside City College library. It was titled "Sick of Living / Unwilling to Die." What's interesting about the poem is that the language used and the handwriting resembled that of the Zodiac letters. The poem was signed with what we assume is the author's initials, RH. During the 1970s investigation, Sherwood Morrill, California's top examiner, believed that the poem was indeed written by the Zodiac Killer. On April 30th, 1967, Bates' father Joseph, the Press Enterprise, and the Riverside Police all received letters that read, "Bates had to die, there will be more." Two of the letters had a scribble at the bottom that looked similar to a Z symbol. Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle would be given an anonymous tip about the Riverside Attack, where the similarities between the attacks were outlined for him. In 1970, he would go on to publish an article about it in his paper. Zodiac would then write to the Los Angeles Times, and despite Avery being the one to bring the Riverside Attack into the spotlight, Zodiac credited the police, congratulating them on finding out about his Riverside activity. However, he also said, "You're only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there." Both Paul Avery and the Riverside Police do not believe that Zodiac and the attacker at Riverside are the same people. The connection between the two still remains uncertain, but some say that Zodiac claimed to be responsible for the Bates murder at Riverside so as to enhance his own kill count. The Lake Tahoe Disappearance. On March 22, 1971, Zodiac would write again to Paul Avery of the Chronicle and would claim responsibility for the disappearance of a woman named Donna Lass on September 6, 1970. The letter, which was made from a collage of advertisements and magazine letterings, read Sierra Club and the words South Victim 12. It goes on to say, "Peek through the pines, past Lake Tahoe areas and around in the snow," which possibly indicated where he had left the body. The victim, Donna Lass, was a nurse at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel, where she worked until 2 a.m. on September 6, 1970. Both Lass's employer and her landlord received a phone call from an unknown male claiming that Lass had left town due to an emergency. Lass was never found. What appeared to be a gravesite was discovered near the Claire Tapan Lodge in Norden, California, on Sierra Club property. But after excavations, the only thing found was a pair of sunglasses. No evidence has been found to link Zodiac and the disappearance of Lass definitively. Zodiac remained silent for nearly 3 years after his letter about Donna Lass. It wasn't until January 29th of 1974 did the Chronicle receive a letter from the Zodiac praising the 1973 Exorcist movie as the best satirical comedy he'd ever seen. This would be the last letter that police are certain was written by the Zodiac himself. As you can imagine, the Chronicle and the police received a mass amount of letters all claiming to be the Zodiac, and some adopting his mysterious ways of writing to create their own characters, including A Citizen and The Red Phantom, all of whom wrote seemingly normal letters like complaints about columns, but with the same eerie tone as the Zodiac. In May 2018, the Vallejo Police Department announced that they would be attempting to collect the Zodiac Killer's DNA from the back of stamps that he used during correspondence using modern technology. Testing is currently underway. In February 2014, it was reported that a man named Louis Joseph Myers had confessed to a friend named Randy Kenny that he was dying and that he himself was indeed the Zodiac Killer. He asked Kenny that upon his death to go to the police and tell them what he had said. Far-fetched as it sounds, there are several connections between Myers and the Zodiac case. For one, Myers was in the same high school as David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, the first reported victims of the Zodiac Killer. He also worked in the same restaurant as the victim Darlene Ferrin of the second attack. Furthermore, Myers also had access to military boots, the same boots that had left a print at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. Myers was also stationed overseas between 1971 and 1973, the same years that the Zodiac did not write any letters. Kenny said that Myers confessed he began targeting couples because he had a bad breakup with a girlfriend, and that it had damaged him for life. It seems like this turned into a love for killing, which is why he may have branched outside of his pattern by the fifth murder of Paul Stine. But what are your thoughts on the Zodiac Killer? What do you think happened to him? Was he really this audacious to write to the police and brag about his killings? Can the cryptograms even be solved, and if they can, how comes no one's ever been able to do it so far in over 30 years? Let me know what you thought about today's video in the comments below, and tell me what you think about the new series covering serial killers. As always guys, if you like this video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Until the next time guys.